In this second tutorial for the Eternal Lands map editor, we'll look at ground tiles, as well as a starting look at 2D objects which tend to be on the ground. First, let's take a look at what is available for ground tiles. Press the ground tile button and then the new object button to open the ground tile panel. Here you're presented with all the available ground tiles you can use. A few are at the very bottom though, and you can see them by pressing the plus button several times to scroll down the list. Press minus to scroll back up. Ignore the white squares as they're just empty placeholders. The 6 you see at the bottom are what I refer to as liquid tiles, various forms of water, dirty water, sewer water, and lava. They are tiles that in-game have some form of movement and in some cases reflection. The very first blue tile seen here is another liquid tile as well. It's actually the most common water tile, the one you see around the sides of the continents or islands, ocean water. The other ones at the bottom of the list are used for more specific areas. Ground tiles are all the same size, taking up a 6x6 square of walkable height tiles, as you can see here. That is to say, you could technically fit 36 players on a single tile. The green you see here is height tiling, which we'll cover in a future tutorial. Blah. All standard ground tiles get placed on the map at the same specific height. That is, the height you are most used to seeing on maps in the game. Liquid tiles, such as water, however, get placed lower than their ground counterparts, approximately one step lower, as you'll see when we cover height tiles later. This is because ground must be higher than liquid. You will end up using various 3D objects to cover the empty area between ground and liquid. This applies to all liquid tiles, including the ones such as sewage and lava seen at the bottom of the tile list. As you can see here, they are all below the ground level. Let's put these to use in some examples by starting a very basic map. First, we need to create a new map. I'll be using a very small map for the purposes of this tutorial. As you've seen before, the default new map is covered entirely in grass ground tiles. Before we start a creation, I want to note a very special black tile. This tile is special in that the player cannot see it in the game. Let me show you a quick comparison between areas covered in black tiles and areas with no tiles. Sometimes your 3D objects may get positioned in ways that they should be partly hidden underground, but there's open area that may make them visible. This black tile can be used to cover that area to block the object from view from the player. Here I've placed an area with the black tile on the left and deleted the tiles in an area on the right. By the way, when you use the kill object tool on ground tiles, you can hold down shift to clear down all the places on your pointer instead of clicking each tile. I've pulled out a 3D object that is a tall pillar and moved it down so half of it is below ground level. I have also cloned it to place a second one in the black tile area. As you can see, the object can only be seen above ground level on the left, whereas it is fully visible on the right. You should use the black tiles sparingly, but do use them as is deemed necessary. We'll put the ground tiles to use in a moment, but first let's go ahead and take a look at using 2D objects. To open 2D objects, click your 2D object button, second from the left, and then your new object button. 2D objects unfortunately don't have a browser to show what each of them is, so you'll have to experiment with these later to see what they are. The names of the objects are helpful, but not by much. Because in a lot of circumstances you may use the same object multiple times, 2D objects are sticky. That is, they will stick to your mouse pointer no matter how many times you put an object on the map, until you right-click to release the object. Things like dirt and such, as seen here, are not uniform, however, and should be a bit randomized. So placing them in the exact same rotation as you just saw would not be pretty on the map. The editor compensates for this by having the 2D objects get placed at a randomized rotation with each click, if you hold the control button while you place the objects. As you see, each one I place now looks different. For things such as dirt and grass and such, you can also get a more randomized look by using several different object tiles. There are three or four different 2D objects available for most every grass and dirt type, all with a different design. You'll see this in use shortly. By default, 2D objects are placed just slightly above the ground tiles. 1 pixel higher is how I refer to it. This is because they're mostly used on the ground. When dealing with other heights, you can use the insert and delete buttons to move them up and down about half a height step per click. The height of your 2D objects is more important, however, when they're placed at the same height and touching each other. This can lead to flicker, which can be seen when you rotate the camera. Here I've placed two 2D objects on top of each other, and I'm zooming in to better show the flicker that occurs as the camera is rotated, or can be seen when one of the objects is moved. If it's flickering like this in the editor, it will most likely flicker in the game client, and that's distracting to players. I fixed the flicker here though by grabbing one of the pieces and holding Shift while pressing Insert to move the object up exactly 1 pixel. This is not really noticeable in the game, and by placing objects at different heights, even this slight, they do not clash with each other. Anytime you're placing a lot of 2D objects, always rotate the camera slightly to check and make sure you haven't created a flicker area. In this case, I have 4 different dirt spots, for example, but by having moved only the center one up 1 pixel, it avoids all flickering with the others. Always use the most efficient way to prevent flicker, keeping as many 2D objects as close to the ground or object they're on as possible. The single pixel shift is also handy when using 2D objects, but one should definitely be above the others. I want this hay, for example, to appear above the dirt. I can use the single shift to make sure it appears that way to players. I rotate the camera to check for flicker, and I see 2 of the dirt objects flickering with each other. Here I fix it simply by moving one of the dirt tiles a bit away from the other one. Or if I want the dirt more clustered, like this, I can move the hay, move that tile in, and shift it up 1 pixel. The hay will clash with that pixel, so I have to shift the hay up so it is now 2 pixels above the lowest dirt. You can do 3 to 4 pixels up without the player noticing, but always aim to keep the objects as close to the ground as possible. Now that you have a basic idea of how to use both ground tiles and 2D objects, let's start with a very simple map. Once again, I'm starting with a new very small map here. For our example, we'll be creating a very basic beach area, that is, a sandy area next to water. We'll start by clicking the water tile in the new ground tile panel and replacing the 2 rows of tiles at the bottom of the map with water. And next the sand tile, which is the second one on the second row, and use it to replace 2 rows of grass tiles with sand. Remember how water is always lower than the ground? You see that here. We'll fix that with 3D objects in the next tutorial, so ignore it for now. In a real map, we wouldn't have it straight across this scene here, but use more tiles to randomize the view to add more realism. For the purpose of the tutorial, we'll just use straight lines for now. One of the most useful places you can use 2D objects is to use the objects referred to as edges along the edge of ground tiles to cover the straight lines made by the tiles. So I've selected a dirt edge tile that matches the sand. I'll rotate it by holding down the control button and using the left or right arrow keys so it's the direction needed for the ground tile edge. As mentioned before, there are multiple 2D objects for grass and sand that serve the same purpose, just look different. This dirt has 3 possible edges, and we'll use all 3 randomly across the edge so that no pattern is shown to the player. I'll open all 3 objects, rotate them correctly, and place them on the map. From here, I can just use the clone tool to grab copies of them without having to open the menu or rotate every object. I can now start placing the edges across the edge of the sand ground tiles. It's fine to have the objects overlap the sand, just make sure they cover the straight line of the ground tile. As you do this, remember to mix it up and randomly clone the three objects to avoid making a pattern. As well, remember to not let them overlap. Zoom in as needed, but place the edges directly next to each other to not leave an open space or have them flicker against each other. Don't use shifting up a pixel for edges to avoid flicker unless it's the only viable option. This can be noticeable at certain angles, much more so than the things like the dirt spots I showed earlier. We'll also be doing something with shifted up objects shortly. Here, they were slightly flickering at the edge, so I'm picking up the object and placing it again. A reminder, you should be regularly saving your work. I'm not doing that here in this tutorial, but as you complete something that took some effort to do, like this line of edges for example, save afterwards. And we'll continue cloning edges randomly and placing them until we've covered the full line across. The edge objects are about the same length as a ground tile, so 16 ground tiles here means about 16 edges. We're about 2/3 of the way across now. A reminder that random means you can place the same edge object next to each other. Just don't do it continuously, otherwise you'll end up with a pattern that the players will notice. When we get to the end, we see that there's only room for one more edge tile, but there's more open space than one edge tile can cover. Placing space between the edge objects is easier to deal with than on the edge of the map, so we'll line the final edge to the side of the map rather than the previous edge object. To fix this open space, we can grab an object that's just a spot of the same dirt to cover it. We'll use Shift and Up Insert to move it up 1 pixel, and then place it on top of the edge tiles to cover the space that was made between them. While holding down the Control button, I can randomly place this dirt spot in random places that's already 1 pixel above the edges, across the edges, to give the sand more realism, as sand is rarely seen in a straight across pattern. The sand object does not have to be placed solely on the top of the edges, but can be placed further out into the grass to make spots of sand that may have been tracked there by people walking across this edge. And with that, you've gained a look into the methods used to allow 2D objects to make the ground not just a bunch of squares. Take some time to go through the 2D objects and learn what is available, as it's much more than just dirt and grass. And this ends our tutorial, though now I'm going to place some hard surface ground tiles that will be used with the next tutorial, 3D objects. I'm going to make a large area of brick surface, as may be seen inside a city or used as roads. We're not really making a usable scene here, we're just examples of how to put things together. The straight lines between the grass and the bricks are a problem though. After this tutorial, do this and find some 2D grass edge objects that match the grass and place them along the edges of the bricks. Remember to not let the edges overlap. Use grass spots similar to how we use dirt spots that are single pixel moved up to cover any holes between edge objects. I've also placed some ground tiles off to the right that are used for a vegetable garden. You can ignore those for now. And that's it until next time, where we'll get to the meat of any map, the 3D objects.